Hi everyone. In this video of Accelerated Chess Dragon, we're going to be looking at a game played between Mikhail Botvinnik and Paul Keres. This was played in the 1948 World Chess Championship in The Hague, Netherlands. And without further ado, let's look at this game. Botvinnik starts the game off by playing the move d4. We have knight f6 by Keres, c4, e6, knight c3, and now bishop b4, the Nimzo-Indian defense. e3, castles by Keres, and now a3. And here, Keres decides to play the move bishop takes c3 check. He gives up his dark squared bishop, but he is going to double Botvinnik's pawns. And that could be somewhat of an advantage, and Keres' plan is going to be playing on Botvinnik's weakness, which is the light squares, and Botvinnik is just going to play with his bishop pair and try to activate both of those bishops since they're both somewhat locked in, and then he can continue from there having the bishop pair. So b takes c3 was played by Botvinnik, just capturing the bishop, rook e8, knight e2, and now e5. And the idea of e5 is to try and perhaps maybe tempt Botvinnik to capture on e5, and the idea is that then his pawn structure would be in ruins. You see here that Botvinnik does have two doubled pawns, and also one isolated pawn. And if you are able to maybe separate these two pawns from this d pawn, then those two pawns on the c file are very liable targets that you can attack, and hence that's why you do not really want to be capturing those pawns. Because they will just give you they'll just give you a bigger weakness as Botvinnik. So Botvinnik doesn't capture the pawn on e5, and instead he just plays knight g3. He continues developing, he's getting ready to bring his bishop to d3, and now d6. Keres is just reinforcing the e5 pawn, and now bishop e2. Knight bd7, castles, and c5. And after a couple of more moves, Botvinnik has actually mended his pawn structure, which is something that Keres shouldn't have done. In this move, c takes d4 is definitely a mistake. If you think about it, the only reason why Keres ever gave up his dark squared bishop was so that Botvinnik would have doubled pawns, and that would basically be what Keres was playing against. But now after c takes d4, c takes d4, first of all, you've undoubled Botvinnik's pawns, and second of all, now it's a bit harder to play against the weaknesses, like the c4 pawn, and it's a lot easier for white to defend them than before. Knight b6 is played, trying to perhaps put pressure on the c4 pawn, bishop b2, and now e takes d4, as there were threats of d takes e5, and winning a pawn. For instance, if you play a6 as black, then after d takes e5, d takes e5, queen takes d8, rook takes d8, and bishop takes e5, white would have a clear pawn advantage. So instead, e takes d4 was played. And now, instead of capturing the pawn immediately, Botvinnik plays a very nice move. He plays e4, and the entire intention of playing this e4 move is that you keep your solid structure with your f3, g2, and e4 pawn, and basically you're going to recapture with a queen or the bishop, and essentially what's going to happen is your queen and bishop are going to be eyeing down at the g7 pawn, and your pawn on e4 and c4 are kind of creating somewhat of a Maroczy bind. If any of you have played the Sicilian, then you'll know that a Maroczy bind is quite useful to control the d5 square, and perhaps that could be where Botvinnik's knight could be landing very soon. I mean, who knows? Bishop e6 is played, just to attack the c4 pawn, and before capturing the pawn with the queen, which is playable, rook c1 was played by Botvinnik, just defending. He knows that the d4 pawn will not be able to escape, so he's just taking his time with the pawn. Rook e7 was played, and now queen takes d4. Queen c7 was played, just first of all getting the queen out of the d file, and also getting ready to bring this rook to d8. And here c5 was played. And now after dc5, rook c5, we have queen f4, bishop c1. And the idea of bishop c1 is to gain a tempo on the queen, but it's also trying to get the rook on c5 to the g5 square. And the main problem is that you can't necessarily guard that because the bishop would be guarding the g5 square. And also, you can't play queen h4. Because if you do this, then there is bishop g5, and unfortunately for you, your queen is trapped. So you have no other option but to give up your queen, and then you're obviously losing. So instead, queen b8. This is the only possible move if you don't want to lose. Rook g5 was played, and here there was another option that Keres could have went for that still would have given him a losing position, but it wouldn't have been as bad as what happened in the game. What happened in the game was knight bd7, and this move is already losing Keres at least so much material, if not it's losing him the game. So what Botvinnik played is a very famous combination, and I encourage you to pause the video and find it. Find the idea that Botvinnik employed in this position. Okay, so Botvinnik played the move rook g7 check. And the idea is that, first of all, you're just removing the cover around the black king. And secondly, it's more or less forcing black to actually capture the rook. If you don't capture the rook, then after something like bishop h6, this is already too much for white, and you do not want to give that as black. So king takes g7 is forced. Now, the follow-up may be quite obvious. Knight h5 check, taking advantage of the pinned knight on f6. And you may be thinking, what would be the best move here? Would I want to play king g6, king h8, or king f8? Note, king g8 wouldn't be the best, since after knight f6 check, knight f6, queen f6, the bishop on c1 gets into the h6 square, and that's just too brutal for Keres. The correct move that should have been played, that doesn't necessarily lose that much material, but also the move that should have been played that loses a bit of material, but is better than checkmate, and what Keres really should have played, is actually king f8. Because if king f8 is played, then is king h8. Because if king h8 is played, then after knight f6, and now queen f6, king g8. After knight h5 check, it's very hard to find out what you could do as Keres. Keres, probably under all this pressure from Botvinnik's forces, decided to play king g6. And king g6 is probably the worst of all the moves that Keres could have played. So I encourage you to pause the video and find out how Keres just lost the game after Botvinnik's next move. What did Botvinnik play that forced Keres to resign? Okay, so Botvinnik played the move queen e3. And after this move was played, Keres just resigned the game. Keres resigned because the fact that this queen is either coming to g5 or h6 to deliver checkmate is unstoppable. It doesn't matter which threat you try to guard, the other one will be the killing blow. Whether you guard queen g5 by playing something like knight takes e4 and allowing this, or if you defend queen h6 like this and get mated this way. And it's hard to really recommend another move for Keres in a position where he's absolutely lost. King g8 could have been another move, but this would allow too much counterplay after knight f6 check, and after, say, knight f6, queen f6. Maybe you could try the move bishop c4, but this is just too much after bishop b2 because there's a threat of checkmate. And here you must give up a lot of material in order to survive. Even then, it's very unlikely whether you're still going to be able to play the position. So that is why after the move, Queen e3 was played here. Keres resigned the game, and a brilliant victory for Mikhail Botvinnik. So I hope you all enjoyed the video, and if you have any suggestions or feedback for me, please let me know in the comments section, and stay tuned for more chess.